Hi there! We're right on the verge of the premiere for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is the second Game of Thrones spin-off series. And the lead up to that, I've been going over notes I took on interviews given by the new showrunner, discussing their overall approach to the TV series. In this video, I'm going to quickly address the revelation that the show will make frequent use of Family Guy-style cutaway gags, both for humor, but also for exposition, that they will be using flashbacks. Well, this is from the interviews with the lead cast at New York Comic Con where they explained this, though a few days ago the block on advance reviews was lifted, and this has been confirmed. The series makes frequent use of cutaway gags. This touches on a big question we've had for a long time, in terms of how are they going to convey exposition in a show with such a small cast? Because in George R. R. Martin's prose writing, characters often recall things through vivid narration, vivid memories, which drifts into just an exposition dump, like Ned remembering Robert's Rebellion, but it's not in dialogue. That was a challenge even on Game of Thrones Season 1, even if it had normal screenwriters. But with a larger cast, it's not too difficult to transfer those into dialogue scenes between two people. So instead of having Ned Stark with an inner monologue describing Robert's Rebellion, make it a dialogue scene between Ned and Robert, or Ned arguing with Jaime Lannister about what happened in Robert's Rebellion, what happened during the war. The issue is that A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is based on a short novella with only one POV character, Duncan the Tall. And as I went over the longer video before this one, Martin even stressed that Dunk's squire Egg will never be a POV character in the novella series. So this was a directive that he handed down to the TV adaptation. Never have a scene where Dunk is not the POV, barring literally one or two very special exceptions for bigger impact when they happen. But for everyone who read the novella, we know that particularly that there's so much of it is just inner monologue from Dunk's perspective, that we've been wondering, will they have long flashback scenes? And we were wondering this even before we learned Martin is doubling down on Dunk is the only POV, because these aren't things he could easily tell Egg or other people. Of course, Game of Thrones avoided flashbacks because, as we later found out, Benioff and Weiss are bad at them. And they had this whole thing where they said, oh, we tried to avoid fantasy tropes like prophecies and flashbacks. Flashbacks are not a fantasy trope, they're a widespread narrative device. Breaking Bad used flashbacks all the time. So the good news overall is we knew this from casting information. We heard they were casting characters we know were from Dunk's childhood in the slums of King's Landing, that, hooray, they'll actually use flashbacks as a narrative device. But beyond that, what we learned from these comments, starting with New York Comic Con and then onward from that, from the interviews that Peter Claffey and Dexter Saul Ansel gave, well, there'll be cutaway gags for humor and exposition, frequently with Dunk and Sir Arlen. He explained, Peter specifically said that, like, when Dunk is burying Sir Arlen, this is the night he squired for, he died of a chill on the road, that this man is the closest thing he ever had to a father figure. And months ago we wondered, will Arlen even have speaking lines in this show? And it turns out from the advanced reviews they said he actually has quite a bit of dialogue. It's all in flashback scenes. He's actually a very interesting character. Well, has screen presence. And combine that with that this has had a graphic novel adaptation. The graphic novel just has frequent flashback panels, not even the big flashbacks to the Blackfire Rebellion or something. It'll have like a panel showing Dunk having a conversation with Sir Arlen. So we wondered if they would do that. Turns out they will. But it's almost played for comedy, and this is Peter describing it, and again, this is third hand, I haven't seen it yet. but the example is something like, as he's burying Sir Arlen or thinking back to him, have Dunk say, Sir Arlen straightened me out. He was the closest thing to a father I ever had. Then do a quick Family Guy-style Gilligan cut to Arlen giving a good clout in the ear because he stole a pie. You know, that kind of thing. For all of 1 second, very quickly for comedic effect, then cut back to the present and have Dunk with an embarrassed look say, yeah, I deserve that. I did steal that pie. Now, comedy is subjective, so I don't want to judge this, that I'd have to see it, and you can make a bad joke in good faith. More than drama, comedy is hard. But overall, the real point here is I'm happy to see they're expanding the narrative formats that they feel they can use in this, that Game of Thrones set a terrible template in terms of the art of page to screen. They really weren't that skilled at it, of handling things. They wouldn't use flashbacks. They avoided things that are hard to do. And then people said, wow, they're so brilliant at this. No, there is an objective list of tropes and styles and narrative framing devices that they chose not to use. So, this is nice to have, but on top of this, there's another thing, by the way, that on top of that there's flashbacks for comedic effect. One thing they mentioned that we saw starting in the full trailer that came out in November is they were worried people would think it was goofy. I actually think it wasn't in the trailer. Another way to get through exposition as a narrative device is that Dunk talks to his horses. And, you know, like in the trailer scene where the two women are saying, oh, hedge knights, they're like a sad version of a knight. And then he turns to his horses, he walks away and goes, I'm not sad. Like, basically that. And we were worried about this, anyone familiar with it, like, if it's really like a 6-part story, like the comic adaptation was actually also 6 issues, there's barely any dialogue in the first issue because it's Dunk alone on the road. Eventually he gets to an inn, but he really only meets Egg and hires him as a squire at the start of the second one. He encounters him before that, but there is very little spoken aloud dialogue. And so much of it is his inner thoughts as he's on the road to Ashford. How would you convey that? Have him talk to his horse. Which makes sense. People talk to their pets. You know, it's not like talking to a car. I mean, it's alive. Or something like when he's burying Arlen, just wailed to the horse next to him. Arlen didn't deserve to die like this, Sweetfoot. Arlen was a good man. He didn't deserve to die alone on a road like this. This is all he ever got for his life. So okay, that they're mixing it up. Notice that unlike Game of Thrones, thought went into how are we going to do exposition. That, well, at points we'll have to rely on him talking to his horse, but that won't come up again after Egg is his squire, which happens in, first third of the story, so okay, they'll do that. But a bigger thing will be these frequent micro flashbacks to things. Will they be good jokes? Will they not? I'm not sure. But also we know that they're doing straight up like a block flashback to Dunk in Flea Bottom, so I'm encouraged by all of this. Now, let me be clear. I'm not against the use of cutaway gags as a device. I might dislike their style of humor, because we're hearing in several advanced reviews, a lot of them are remarking on the very lowbrow humor in it, that there's a lot of poop jokes. That is a separate issue. It's not, we have cutaway gags, those are bad. It's a cutaway gag to a really gross out poop joke. But in general principle, as a narrative, flashbacks, cutaways, that's fine. The Gilligan cut, as people call it. I guess Gilligan's Island did it a lot. Because really, out of all of the spin-offs, this is the one where that makes the most sense. If you're gonna do that, well, it is the show about the commoners. That it is to emphasize the squalor and the lowbrow humor, and that we know there's other points in the season where they said characters in universe will be singing songs with dirty lyrics. Well, they're the commoners. They're not, highborn who are refined and stuff. They said we really want to lean into just how much dirt and mud and shit was in their everyday lives. So there's a lot of poop jokes. Fair enough. I think maybe they should rein it in a little. That's what everyone's saying going into the premiere. But okay that a lot of it is flat. A lot of these poop jokes starting in the first 5 minutes happen without flashbacks, so it's not the flashback cutaways that are at issue, or like Arlen smacking him clout in the ear for yet another thing. I can see that working in general principle. Let's see how they execute it. But this is the dirty world of the commoners. I wouldn't have this in a Nymeria show or Robert's Rebellion or a Valyria show, but it makes sense for Dunk and Egg. It's lowbrow, there's a lot of this cutaways to shit humor. Because the thing you have to remember about the Middle Ages is it wasn't clean. There is shit everywhere. What TV Tropes calls the Dung Ages. That this isn't a king who has a full-time staff whose job it is simply to keep the palace clean and wipe everything. That this is one guy. That when he gets mud on his shirt, it's the only clothes he owns. That mud stain is there, that shit stain on his pant leg, until he cleans it in a river in another scene or something. In a medieval world, there's a saying about how you know if you look at a crowd of people in medieval world, well, which one is the king? The king's the one who doesn't have shit all over him.